Okay, so let me start with Rian. Wants to know how we explore ourselves, how we find our strongest side. I mean, this is really interesting. I think, you know, Caroline and I will both acknowledge that I don't think either of us had a plan. We didn't have a strategy. We didn't have a, you know, a structured route to take. Some people do. You know, many of my colleagues are accountants and they always want to be an accountant and that's what they want to be for the rest of their life. It's not really my cup of tea, but I think it doesn't matter about getting the first job right first time. And I think there's something about just getting something sufficiently stimulating that you can use as a launch pad to move upwards from there. So don't sweat it too much if the first job isn't exactly the right thing. You want to be just surrounded by opportunity. This is something that's hard to navigate now because it's not so easy to do this physically. But I think linking through Rian's question into what Alice and Yulin were saying as well, and trying to sort of join the three together because they all kind of overlap. Just quickly to summarize that, yeah, I did a degree that I wasn't particularly like, you know, ever going to be thinking about as a long-term career, and then into another career that was primarily just focused on making the money, and that didn't fill me with much joy either. But I think one of the things, my route to do it was to just realize I had to change, and just taking a step to keep breaking the silo, you know, to get out of the rut. I think there's a real risk when you get into your career, you know, you get used to a certain amount of income and you're trapped and you've got certain responsibilities. And I worked so hard to kind of get myself out of being stuck, despite being, you know, suffering from depression at the time and all sorts of challenges around grief and all sorts of things. So for me, it was just doing something big and scary, and then bit by bit finding more out about yourself. And actually, some of those decisions were wrong calls. They ended up potentially in cul-de-sacs, but by doing that, it opened up new avenues to try something new. So no, every single time, you know, I can't say I've even nailed it yet. I think the minute that people like me and Caroline say we've nailed it, you know, you won't believe a word we say because we've got so much more to learn and mistakes to make along the way. So in terms of the practical steps I took, Alice and Yulin, you know, I'd come into it from a different angle. I'd come in from a sort of an HR angle, so I was more focused on the people bit. I'd moved into like transformation and change management. So I came into an AI project, not as an AI person, but to manage the people bit of it, basically. And then bit by bit moved across and, you know, did more study. And I'm not a deep tech person, but I'm someone that can sort of speak across the breadth of the subject and manage big projects. So there was, it's not necessarily a route I'd necessarily recommend. What I would say though, there's a lot of questions coming through here about, you know, I'm just about to do this degree. There's another one later on from Yusra. I think you're talking about, you know, you're doing a maths degree at the moment. There's, I think, continually going to be a growth in this field. There's not enough people coming into the space at the moment. I think one of the things that I see a lot of my team doing is going on to do a master's in business AI, so applied AI. And to get into that, you don't necessarily have to have a computer science degree. So I think checking out master's courses, I've shared some resources on the chat there about, you know, free resources to get you up to a certain level. And it might be the case you have to be a bit creative. You might have to do a mixture of getting the first job under your belt, whatever it is. If it's a big enough company, you can probably find the automation team or the technology group there and just ask to volunteer your time on a weekend to help with projects, whatever it might be. And just get yourself, how do I describe it? There's a bit of a cliche, and some of the guys will recognize this, about seeking forgiveness, not permission. So just making it happen and then, you know, asking for permission, you know, forgiveness afterwards. And that was very much the watchword of my career moves in the past. So networking comes into that. Network like hell. On my LinkedIn, I've got, I think, 18,000 connections on LinkedIn. I've never applied for a job in my life. They've always come through my contact list. So anything else you want to add there, Caroline?
Well, I think your last point about networking is really important. I hate networking actually, but I love it if it's something that I'm passionate about. So pick the right things that help you talk about your passions, rather than being in a room where you think, what on earth am I going to say? You know, it's like that question. It's like, what do you do out of work? And I always think, I'm really boring, because people have these really exciting things that they do. And frankly, I like to go shopping. I like a glass of wine in the evening. I like being with my family and watching TV. But networking is really exciting and really powerful when you focus on going to networking events that bring your passions to life. So it's that link again.
Yeah, but people have the wrong impression of networking, don't they? You know, they think that it's all about being overly confident, walking into a room, you know, shaking hands with people. That's not going to happen again, is it? So, you know, networking is going to be different anyway. But even before it was different, that was the wrong sort of networking for for what's required. For me, I think networking is can be done very, very softly. It's going to be much more important doing this digitally. And, you know, if people here aren't using LinkedIn actively or Twitter, then I'd strongly recommend you get busy on that, because but networking is also about a bit of quid pro quo, isn't it? You can't just go around making connections for the sake of it. There's got to be more of a speculate to accumulate, and it's very much a sales technique, isn't it, Caroline? You know, you've got to give far more than you ever expect back in return. So be useful, share resource, help people, get your people lifted up, and there's a serendipity that occurs where people will look after you. Don't expect it, but it will happen. And it's happened time and time and time again in my career, where I just keep doing the right thing year after year after year, and it pays itself back in spades, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the thing I'd add to that is it's about a spectrum of the journey you go on, right? So knowledge is really powerful, it really is. But you also need to be able to influence. Knowledge helps you influence. So that's a nice spot. And it's not necessarily about selling yourself or selling a product. And I've worked in sales jobs as well. And as a leader, you have to be able to influence people, because influencing people is how you get your diversity of workforce to really come together as a team to achieve some pretty awesome stuff. So be very, very mindful of the difference between knowledge and communication and how they play together, self-awareness and influence. Because as a leader, all the time, Rob, I'm sure you understand it, you have to communicate and you have to influence. And when you're navigating something as challenging as COVID-19, when there is no perfect blueprint to help you with that, because it's never happened before, knowledge isn't as helpful. Communication is more critical. Self-awareness is really important, because you have to show you care, because we do care, but you also have to ensure that the business is still alive, so that people still have jobs. So there's really, really tough tensions actually as you progress through your career and start to step up into that leadership role. But for me, I would say, I love the quote from Winston Churchill. He said, the difference between leaders and managers is communication. Very powerful. And communication is an art. So that then takes me back to the power of data and storytelling. There's a balance. Yeah. It's really important.